Hi, welcome to another episode of Techbytes, the ServiceNow podcast that helps you use the product better, faster, and more efficiently. We're very happy to be back and have our first recording for 2016. Today, I'm very pleased to have two guests. I have Cesar.Sandoval here. Hi, Cesar.
Hello.
Cesar is a customer support staff engineer here at ServiceNow and has been with us for 5.5 years.
Yes.
He's got a lot of time on the ground.
A dinosaur in ServiceNow years.
A dinosaur. You don't look like a dinosaur, though, Cesar. And we also have Bryan Barnard on the phone. Hi, Bryan.
Hello.
Bryan is an integrations product manager, and he's been with us almost 1 year now, Bryan?
Yep, it'll be a year in March, so I'm still a baby compared to Caesar here, but I've got some legs underneath me now.
That's good. Very good. We are talking about an exciting new feature in the Geneva release today. Bryan and Cesar are going to help us understand scripted REST APIs for creating a custom REST API inside your scoped applications. This is a big new feature in Geneva, so I'm pleased that they can give us a little bit of background information about this. Bryan, I'm going to throw it over to you first if you want to give us a little introduction to scripted REST APIs.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So scripted REST APIs are a new feature we brought out in Geneva, and we're really excited to get them out there. I'm really excited to get them out there because before I was at ServiceNow, I was actually a customer, and I was looking for this feature and wanted this feature for building some integrations I was working on previously. And so we brought scripted REST APIs out with Geneva really to help customers be able to build their own REST APIs on ServiceNow. And essentially, these REST APIs that they can build now allow them to use configuration and some scripting to build their own custom interface that lends itself to RESTful web services, which is not official standard, but more of a convention for how to build web services. And with scripted REST APIs, they can go in ServiceNow and start that up, and via configuration, creating records and configuring their data model, decide what endpoints they want to create. They can use custom path parameters, and they can also leverage the HTTP verbs that you'd expect to use with REST APIs. We'll go into more of that more detail in a moment here. But then, Cesar, I also want to give you a chance. So that's my perspective, having been a customer and from the product management side. But from your perspective, dealing with customers and support every day, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're excited about scripted REST APIs.
Well, before I put my support hat, let me put my developer hat in. I was a Java developer in my previous life. And this particular feature actually, as a developer, makes me really excited. It pretty much opens up our platform to virtually anything that a customer or a developer can think of. Let's keep in mind REST is not new in Geneva. We had REST prior to Geneva, but we can only do updates. We can add data. We can get records, and that's about it on the tables. And that was available out of the box, fairly easy to use. What this adds is constraints that developers had with that basic REST prior in Fuji and prior releases. It actually gives us, for example, let me just maybe it's better if I just come up with an example. If a customer wants to get data from multiple tables in one REST call, with script REST APIs, they can do that now.
And they could not do that before because they were restricted.
They were restricted, exactly. They could do that with scripted SOAP web services. But what we found out with SOAP, it is a little bit cumbersome to set up and to use. REST is a lot easier.
Yeah, I would second that. So, I mean, developers, what we found today is developers are starting to expect REST APIs. The term, even when you say APIs more and more frequently, the expectation is there's going to be RESTful APIs. And a lot of times this means that people are expecting to have HTTP verbs to be lined up with actions that are going to be exposed via an API, as well as to speak JSON in their format for requests and responses. And we provided that with, I guess the best way to refer to them is our platform REST APIs in the past to deal with table data in ServiceNow, and also some aggregate data and import. And those platform REST APIs are really our table APIs, our import set APIs, our aggregate APIs, and also new with Geneva was our attachment API. And those are APIs that we at ServiceNow provide. The scripted REST APIs, to put them in context, is really they let customers build their own REST API on the platform. And I'm glad you brought it up, Cesar. So in the past, we did have scripted SOAP web services. These did provide you some ability to create a custom interface that spoke SOAP and have a WSDL. What we're seeing more and more, like I mentioned before, is people are expecting REST APIs. The minute you as a developer wanted to build a REST API on ServiceNow, your own custom REST API, the only path you could take would be use a custom processor. Custom processors give you a lot of power, but with that power comes a lot of responsibility. And in addition, we didn't have sort of first-class documentation or scriptable objects to support you using those processors. People oftentimes fumble with that. I think you can back me up on that, Cesar, when you hear questions from customers. I know I ask questions a lot of times about processors, whereas with scripted REST APIs, not only do we want to give you the ability we given you the ability to build a REST API, have a custom path parameters, query parameters, support for versioning and security. But we've also given you first-class JavaScript scriptable objects. What I mean by that is we've added ServiceNow API, added to the ServiceNow API. So for instance, in a scripted REST API, you can say request, and that request object will have properties, and that request object in scope for you when you're scripting in a scripted REST API. And you can get access to the properties of the request that was received by ServiceNow. So you can get access to the URL, you can get access to the path parameters, you can get access to the payload in the body, and then use that information easily to write the logic of your application or of the interface for your application. And I'll touch on that in a minute here. In turn, we also give you a response object that gives you properties and methods that explicitly let you deal with the response that's going to be sent back to the requester. A lot of times you want to, as an API creator, you want to have a format for your API. You want to have some documentation for that. You want to have your logic that works based on the input that came in, and then you want to give back a formatted response that meets the needs of your requester, and have the ability to do that completely custom. Whereas in the platform APIs, we've dictated what that response is going to be. But in scripted REST APIs, you can do that. And one thing I want to also mention, you're going to see this in Geneva more and more places, not just scripted REST APIs, but in the script blocks, when you type in request dot or response dot, you're also going to get autocomplete. So we've made it really easy for you to see what properties and methods are available to you because we're giving you that autocomplete with some metadata when you hover so that you can understand how those should be used. We think that's going to be really helpful. We mentioned something key earlier about people putting these scripted REST APIs inside scoped applications, and that is completely possible. But I want to add to that, you can also have these scripted REST APIs be part of global applications. Now, what's the use case where they would be in a scoped application? That brings up some really interesting use cases. So more and more when people build applications these days, they expect to have an API or a web API interface as well as a UI, a user interface, like a graphical user interface. So for instance, say I was building an application in ServiceNow and it was going to be used to track, and I'm struggling, I'm not a creative person, so I'm going to say movie rentals, right? So I'm going to have some movies, and I wanted to have my graphical representation, and this would have some forms. I'd have a form where I could enter some data. Maybe I'd have a service catalog item where I could go and request to rent that movie. That would give me my user interface, a graphical user interface. But then if somebody wanted to build an integration with me and I wanted to afford them a custom API, provide them with a custom API that didn't make them require them to know about the names of my fields in the tables behind movies, or know that I had two tables that actually made up those movie records, maybe one for actors and one for the actual movie titles. Instead, I want to give them an API that gives them operations that are things like rent movie instead of insert movie, right? Insert movie is very specific to like you're interacting with a database level. And if you create a custom scripted REST API, you could create an API that gave you operations such as rent movie. And it received a request that only took in the minimal amount of data that was necessary, and then gave back a custom response. So if you wanted to combine both the actor information, the status of that movie having been rented or not, as well as some additional metadata in that response, you could do that using scripted REST APIs. Or if you wanted to come up with an API that was part of the movie's rental application API that also gave actor information back, you could come up with a specific operation in your scripted REST API that gave back that type of a response that your app needed, or the people that were writing clients that were going to integrate with your app needed. And that could be part of your scoped app. So it could be versioned. You could work on it in Studio. You could set protection policies on it so that people could not change it. It could be read only, and that could be deployed because it's a scoped app. It could be deployed via the store or via the app repos that allow you to use the new method for deploying applications on ServiceNow instances instead of update sets.
So it's very powerful. It sounds like you can do almost anything that your brain can think up.
Yeah, I mean, it really gives you a lot of power and ability to create a custom web API on ServiceNow, and there are some limitations, but we've really given you a lot of flexibility and ability to access what we think you're going to need to from those requests and those responses. We've tried to be as simple as possible in naming our objects that you interact with from the JavaScript side. So instead of something like SC underscore processor request, when you're in those script blocks, you get to use request and response. We also give you some helper error objects. So if you want to send back an error message and have them be standardized, you can see those. I would suggest you go to our product docs for those. And Suzanne, I think there's going to be links with this podcast, so we'll give you links to all our product docs where you can go and find out more information about the details of the meat of scripted REST APIs. And also, if you don't have Geneva yet and you're dying to see these, we have our developer program, and we really encourage people to go out there, get yourself a personal instance, get it on Geneva, and go ahead and start working with scripted REST APIs in the instance.
I want to talk a little bit about the versioning abilities in the scripted REST APIs. I know the scripted REST APIs can be versioned, and that allows customers to test and deploy changes without impacting existing integrations. Can you talk a little bit more about how the versioning works?
We added support for versioning in here. Versioning is a pretty popular topic when it comes to REST APIs. People are very opinionated about how this should be done, and we wanted to give flexibility. Essentially, it's better to give an example or to provide some context about what that means. So I could have a version 1 of my API, and I require to rent a movie. Let's go back to my horrible movie example. To rent a movie, all you have to give is the name, right? And if the status of that movie is checked in, this is all fictional, then you'd get a response that said, okay, you checked it out, and you would have given some of your authorization and authentication credentials as part of that, so we'd know to check it out for you. And then we decide that later on we actually want to have you provide additional data, right? So maybe not just your name, but also your membership ID. Our application has matured, but we've got customers that have already built integrations that don't provide that, and we don't want to call them, have to wait for everybody to upgrade their clients. And in this case, the client isn't just a user, a human that's clicking a user interface. In this case, the client is an application that somebody wrote, right? A client they programmed it. It's expecting a certain interface. It only knows to provide certain data. And yet we want to release version 2 of our API or our app or that specific endpoint. So with versioning, what you can do in script REST APIs is decide to create a new version of your endpoints, and what it's going to do is it'll automatically copy all of the initial versions of your endpoints, create additional ones, but that version now becomes part of the path, right? So when you make that request to acme.servicenow.com / your custom script REST API path and parameter, there will always be, you can always use a v1 or a v2 or whatever versions you have in that path to direct that request to a specific version of the endpoint. But then you as the API designer in ServiceNow can specify that a certain version should be the default, right? So you could say, hey, version 1 is going to be my default. If somebody does not specify the version in the path, then I'm going to route that request to the default. In my case, maybe the default is the version of the endpoint that doesn't require the membership ID. But if somebody wants to use version 2, right, say I have new clients, I could say, hey, include v2 in that path, and your request will be routed to v2. That way, you can actually change and iterate your application that is a scripted REST API or a scripted REST API, a portion of your application, without breaking all of your existing integration clients, right? And you still have to be cognizant of the way you're writing that script and what you're requiring, but you can have a way via configuration to control routing and route requests based on the version that's in that path. So we think that'll be really helpful for people and give them the flexibility they need. One thing in addition is that if people want to say, I don't want any default version, I want to make people explicitly request a version of that API endpoint when they make that request, then we also give that functionality too. You can turn off, the default request routing to a version, and then the requesters always have to enter that version information. And these are some feedback we've gotten from people that are building APIs that want to have that functionality. They're really happy to have that flexibility to A, have defaults, or B, require people to explicitly state what version of an endpoint they want to request when they do make those requests.
I want to toss it over to Cesar now, because we get to have you put your developer hat on and your customer support extraordinaire hat on. If people want to start using the scripted REST APIs, can you give them any best practices or tips and tricks so they start off right and they create elegant APIs and they don't have to call and get frantic help for them?
Yes. I believe, well, actually, it's a good thing that Brian just ended with versioning, because I'll start with versioning.
That's an excellent segue.
You, if it is best practice, and I strongly recommend to start with version 1. Not to use a default. Using a default, then there's a question mark by the developer that's writing an application that's consuming your service. A question mark meaning which version am I using? If you start from the get-go with Vue version 1 on your path, usually looks like slash Vue1 slash, then there will be no question about it that's the service you will always get and it will never change on you. So that would be my recommendation. It is very easy to forget about versioning when you create your first one. You're, I guess, very excited to create your own scripted REST API. You publish it, and then once people start using it, then you remember you did not publish the version number. So that is one thing that I recommend. Another thing that I would recommend is to think about permissions. You do not want other people or people that are not intended to use your scripted REST API. You may inadvertently publish sensitive data. So always from the very beginning, start thinking about locking down sensitive data. And we do provide with our scripted REST API the ability to assign roles to our scripted API. So only users with a certain role can use that scripted API. Very easy to use. The third one, I say, a third best practice is to use the documentation feature on our scripted REST API. Again, you might be, I'm probably using myself as an example. I might be too excited to publish this brand new scripted REST API that provides very cool functionality, and documentation just sits on the wayside, I guess. It is very important to document the scripted REST API because you want people to use this. If this was something that you were publishing to I'm speaking in general terms to the world, then you want people to use it. But in the ServiceNow world, you don't want anyone to use it, but specific users. But those specific users that will use it, you want them to have good documentation. The more documentation you have, and again, we do provide that ability on our form when you're creating your scripted REST API to document what each function does, what to expect as a response, and what the function is expecting as input. So I guess those are the three things that I would recommend.
The one thing I want to add from what Cesar's saying about that documentation is, we have provided fields on when you define your scripted REST API, both at the API level and the endpoint or resource level. And that documentation you put there will be exposed in the REST API Explorer. And I want to make sure we mention the REST API Explorer. This functionality came out in Fuji, and the REST API Explorer really lets people discover and then test our REST APIs. And not only do we support our platform APIs I mentioned earlier, like the table and the import set and the aggregate and attachment in the REST API Explorer, but we also support the scripted REST APIs. So that really means that as an API designer, by default, you automatically get support for that API in the REST API Explorer. So, what does that really mean? So in the past, you might have said, "Hey, I'm gonna build this API, and I'm gonna write some static documentation, and this documentation is gonna live over my wiki, and people can go look at it, but when they look at the documentation, all they really get to see is look at the documentation." So think about what this means, and this is a pretty common use case for people that are building clients or trying to make calls and build integrations with APIs. Usually people have two screens. Not to call anybody out there, maybe you got one giant screen and you're a developer, but you have two screens. And the left screen, you've got documentation, uh, pretty plain old documentation. The right screen, you've got maybe an ID, or maybe you're writing some code that's going to make an HTTP request. And you sit there and you try to get your HTTP request to match the format that you need for that request that you've seen from the documentation. And maybe you get some error messages back, and finally after 3 or 4 requests, you come up with the right format, and then you decide to write that code. Sounds pretty normal. A lot of people wouldn't balk at that. However, what the API Explorer allows you to do is it knows about ServiceNow. It allows you to select a ServiceNow API, and then it will ask you for the inputs that it needs for that operation you've specified. So what do I mean by operation? For one of our platform REST APIs, like the table API, one of the operations is to get records, and you would choose a table that you want to get records from. For a scripted REST API, those operations, you would choose the API by name, and then you choose the operation, which is some of the resources that you've specified in your scripted REST API, and then it would ask you for the inputs that are necessary. So if it's a GET request and there's actually no mandatory inputs, you could literally go ahead and click send, and from your web browser, without having to have any special tooling up or an IDE, you can actually send that request to the REST API on that instance of ServiceNow. And what you're going to see immediately is you're going to see some details about the request, including the headers and the path, the URL, any type of parameters, and even the body if you sent a body in, say it was a post. And then you're also going to see the response, right there from within ServiceNow. So you didn't have to write any code to make that HTTP request. You didn't have to open a third-party tool. Using the REST API Explorer, which already knew context of the API you're calling to in ServiceNow, it knows the instance, it can build that URL for you and help you to send that request quickly. And once you've done that, what would be my next step? I go and I'd be trying to copy that information out of that screen. But I'm taking it a step further because we provide code snippet generation for things like a curl request or a Python or a Perl, making a request using those languages to that API in the REST API Explorer. So we really want it to be the first place you go to discover REST APIs on ServiceNow's platform, but also to use it with your scripted REST APIs. We think it's a really powerful feature. Just to bring that back to where we started on that, say I'm building an API, I create some documentation, but then I wanted to create something like a REST API Explorer. If I was doing this solo, I'd have to go stand up. That's a whole other website I'm going to build. That's a REST API Explorer. That's going to be specific. It's like adding a second project to my MVP of just having API, but then making it discoverable. Instead, when you build this service now, you get this discovery feature for free, right? We wanted to build that in there. And this is becoming more and more common. You're going to see it on things like, some of the other APIs out there that are provided by some of the social networking services. It's pretty common to see these REST API explorers, and we think developers are going to come to expect that. And we wanted to provide that tooling right at the get-go and give our customers the ability to provide that tooling to people that are going to integrate with their applications on ServiceNow.
Those are excellent recommendations, and it's so helpful to start off right and not scramble and go back and do these things after you've published and made it available. We like to talk on the podcast about the underdog feature, or the underdog way of using a feature. Is there something in scripted REST APIs that you want people to know that they can do with scripted REST APIs that might not be obvious? Is there a use for these that is kind of creative that people might not think of initially?
So the other thing I would encourage is I think there's probably some people, maybe this fits the underdog portion a little better, that might be listening to this and saying, hey, I don't know much about APIs, but somebody asked me to build integration and I keep hearing about APIs and I'm trying to automate some processes. How do I get started with these? And we really want to push towards that REST API Explorer as well. And I use an analogy. I'm a pretty impatient person in life, and I'm okay with that. Uh, some people around me might not think that's so great, but when it comes to learning things, I want to press the buttons, right? I was a person who opened the Lego box and didn't read the instructions and just built what I wanted to and tried to get back to the picture on the box later on. But if I get into a car, if I rent a car and I get in a car, I want to turn the radio on. I don't open the glove box and start reading instructions. I think I should just be able to press the buttons and get it on. And then if I want some advanced features later on to set my favorites on the stations, I'll go look at the instructions. That's what we want the API Explorer to do for people too. You say, hey, I want to build an integration with ServiceNow's REST APIs. How do I make a request? You can go there and start, clicking the operation you want to make a request to and click send, and hopefully it's within a minute of going to the page and you're already seeing the request being built and the response coming back. That really helps you, lower the hurdle to trying to start understanding what's happening. I think it's also important for people that may not be so familiar with these integrations that really these are HTTP requests, and it's all about creating the HTTP request that fits the right format, has the right request, the right endpoint, right format, and then doing something with the response. And that REST API Explorer really gives you some more visibility into that. I think that's a really key feature, for scripted REST APIs, but for any type of REST API integration that people might be building with ServiceNow.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for talking about that REST API Explorer. I think that is definitely something that people can use, and it can help organize their work. If people start using the scripted REST APIs, they've got the Geneva release, or as you said, they went and got a developer instance that's on Geneva and they're experimenting with these. We have our Knowledge conference coming up again this year, Knowledge 2016. What is going to be, do you have any idea yet, what is going to be available at the conference for anyone that is interested in obtaining more information about scripted REST APIs, or just, maybe talking to other people in the ServiceNow community about what they're doing and how they're using it?
Yeah, so we've got we're really excited about Knowledge 16. This is my second Knowledge, having been at the company, and we really want to get some of this information out and share it with people, and also create an environment where people can share this with each other and talk about what they're doing. So we've got the Knowledge 16, which is one of our Knowledge conferences. Always a lot of information there, and we'll be actually myself and some of the dev team that built scripted REST APIs and builds their integration will be giving a couple presentations at that. You'll also be able to hear from customers that we've talked to that have used some of these integration tools and have built integrations at Knowledge 16. And then in addition, this is our second year putting on a CreatorCon conference, and at the CreatorCon conference, it's a little more geared towards developers that are building things on top of ServiceNow, and we're going to be giving some presentations as well as workshops that use first presentations about what you can do, what people have done with scripted REST APIs. In addition to that, we're going to talk about some sample applications we're building. So we're building some sample client apps for things like mobile, also web, like a website type of client, and we'll be sharing the source code of those. Those will be example applications. We're going to give a presentation where we walk through that source code and talk about how these sample applications are interacting with ServiceNow to really expose how easy it can be for people to connect their applications to ServiceNow via these integrations. And then we'll be doing some workshops where we cover some of this functionality. And in addition, this year, we're trying to do, for the first time, somewhat of a birds of a feather or an unconference part of the CreatorCon, where we're going to have some areas set aside. We'll have tables. We'll have some topics defined ahead of time, but then we'll also give attendees the ability to define the topic they want to talk about at some of these areas and gather together with other attendees and also with some product managers of ServiceNow potentially and any of the other staff that's there and talk about a topic. So for instance, somebody could decide they want to raise a topic and talk about, building integration with Azure using REST, and then actually have other attendees at CreatorCon that are like-minded or completely not like-minded but interested in the topic to talk and learn about that. do some networking, share some information, potentially build contacts that they can use later on to ask questions to or get feedback from. It's also a great opportunity for people to get to meet people and get familiar with people that are at ServiceNow, product managers like myself, developers that are building this stuff every day. We want and need feedback, and we also want to hear how people are using our tools. So we're really excited. That'll be the first time we're doing that at CreatorCon, the sort of unconference portion of it. And we're also amping up all the material to give more material than we gave last year at CreatorCon, some better presentations, additional workshops. We think it'll be a really great opportunity for developers, for people that are actually putting apps in the store, people that are interested in becoming developers and working in ServiceNow. So we really hope to see you at CreatorCon this year.
Yeah, CreatorCon is going to be big this year. It's only going to be, like you said, the second year of doing it, but it was so successful last year that I know there are a lot of people building it up this year and adding new topics and new ways for people to communicate. So I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Bryan, for all of the information and for dialing in with us today.
Really happy to be here. Thank you for allowing us to get here and kind of spread the word and get people information about scripted REST APIs. We're really excited about them. We also are going to have some content that'll be on the community where you can find this podcast. Really encourage you to take a look there. There's some product documentation links for scripted REST APIs. There's some blog post links to people that have blogged about using scripted REST APIs and other developer features that were part of Geneva. There's also a link to a webinar that I gave recently about scripted REST APIs and some other integration features that are new for Geneva. And there's links to a demo scripted REST API that's available on share.servicenow.com that people can pull down, put into their instance, and quickly start using and have a sort of a demo scripted REST API they can use for reference and get up and running.
Yes, lots of additional information out there. A big thank you also to Cesar for his wisdom and best practices and tips and tricks.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Cesar. As Bryan said, we are posting lots of links to additional information about scripted REST APIs, product documentation, Bryan's webinar, the high knowledge base, and the ServiceNow community. So for more information about scripted REST APIs, check those places. And thank you for listening to another episode of ServiceNow Techbytes.